Hi, I am Bibo Bergeron.
I'm Don Paul.
I'm Ramon Zebak.
We're going to talk to you about the color script for the entire movie at this point.
So the color script is the basically the roadmap for the whole film in color, in a thumbnail version. I mean, a very small key of what a scene might look like, and we would go through and pick the important scenes within a sequence, and those would end up telling everybody what even the scenes in between would kind of be. You'd know what to match to.
Color interpretation for the entire film stylistically gives you a feeling for the emotional beats for the film and a lot of the moments that we want to show and feature. So looking at the entire film as a color script is really important as far as the storytelling.
Creation, what it was supposed to do for everybody was give us this myth of El Dorado, give an inkling of what this vision of what people are looking for when they talk about El Dorado. And Kirsten Henshin did the development art for this sequence, and it turned out to be a very stunning sequence. PDI did tons of 3D work, but in a 2D way off of this work. And you can really see her color style coming through in the sequence.
Yeah, the idea behind it was as well to do something a bit naive, like I said before, like a Douanier Rousseau kind of a style, a bit like childish, like a little theater for children. Actually, my idea was this story was told by the chief, by someone like the chief that would read a story in a children book. So I wanted to keep that children book kind of look, and Kirsten did a great job because she has a strong style, and the style was perfect for that opening sequence.
And a lot of those initial designs translated almost directly into production design. So there was not a redesign of most of those things to the extent that we normally go through. So a lot of her work originally started off the ball here.
Crap Game. Basically, Crap Game is the first time we see Spain. We're going to set up Cortez and then get very quickly into a setting where our guys are trying to scam, some locals. And I color keyed this sequence and wanted to get down dark into an alley where you would hide out and try to pull this scam. And basically, there's a couple keys here that give the setup for that sequence.
One thing that's really important to note about this sequence is the lack of color, of saturated color. The first sequence that we just talked about had bold color statements, a lot of big saturation, punched color. This was brought down to sepias, kind of bleached stucco walls, and the color was really saved for the main characters here, and you can see that in this color script.
Yeah, it's almost like saying, okay, back to reality. From the opening sequence to the Crab Game, it's like, okay, now not the real world, and it's a bit duller than the paradise myth.
That's right.
I also wanted to accent the first time the map's pulled out, it has this kind of unearthly glow behind it that helped make it something special for the guys to strive for.
Yeah, and as well, we talked during the movie as well. Then Tulio and Miguel were the only ones with bright colors on them. So somehow they would belong to another adventure than just Spain, and then we can as well spot them, very easily in a crowd, or in any scene, in a very beginning. This is a very crucial sequence when you introduce the main characters. So you have to reframe them correctly and spot them with the different colors than the crowd.
Arrest Him was. Basically, coming out of the Crap Game, we wanted to get into bright sunlight. These guys are on stage now, and we wanted to just totally set the whole thing off, and they're the focus surrounded by this crowd. Wanted to get a good flavor for what Spain would have been like to the everyday kind of guy back then.
I think this frame, the first frame for Arrest Him, was the first colored scene in production.
Yeah,
it was.
First one to go all the way through. Also, the contrast level here is built up a bit more for the action, so you'll see that the shadows are a bit darker. There's much more kind of darks and lights that are playing within this sequence. And that value structure really helped the action.
Yeah, it's actually out of the norm to have such a high contrast look for a film, and it was always a struggle to try and balance it all. But I think the look that came off was actually quite stunning. Yeah, the bull chase was just more Spain, kind of a little travelogue through Spain there. So it's got a very even tone up until we get to the ship, pretty much. We're basically in the same location, same time of day, only 30 seconds or whatever has passed. And then towards the end, we go through, a couple shots setting up all the way until we pop out of the barrels.
That's right. And contrast is coming down a little bit during the chase sequence because some of those cuts were so quick, we needed to make sure that it wasn't as graphic as the sword fight.
Cortez was always envisioned as one of the most dramatic sequences in the film, where these guys are captured and thrown in shackles, and it's candlelight, it's moody, you should almost smell the ship, and the way Cortez was lit, it was very
melodramatic.
Very.
Actually, that was part of the fun of it, was to actually go a little too far with the color and to push the contrast and the color to a melodramatic level to help that.
Yeah, that was a fun one because it started out as a solid idea, and it was followed through. It was pretty consistent, through to the end. It didn't get rethought a bunch of times. Idea with the Brig was after that kind of really warm, shocking light of Cortez, we wanted to take the color down below, so we contrasted that against the bright sky, colorful sky where Altivo is, and then when we get down to the guys below deck, it's gray and kind of desperate, low contrast, except for the light shining through the grate, which was an idea coming out of the Keys that ended up being technically a cool thing to do with a 3D environment that was kind of simple to pull off. Overboard was keyed by, I think, Paul Hussein originally. And we knew we were going to have tons of blue with the ocean and the night sky. So he tried to put a little bit of warmth in the shadows and kind of have that on deck. And then after we get overboard, it's a blue-green fiesta.
That's right.
But yeah, it's pretty continuous up until the end where everything goes gray. And it was pretty cool. The storm montage was, it went through a couple evolutions for how long it was going to be and how far they were going to drift and how much time it was going to take up in the film. But we always had these images of huge waves. These guys you get the idea that they've been thrown a million miles off course by the time we're done. And I think Nathan Folks did several of these keys here. And they just gave a great mood for, the color changes that we were going to have to do to kind of move the audience along without a whole lot of actual screen time. The color actually kind of does it for you.
And also, storm montage, as far as a color tracking sequence, was a transition into the next sequence. So we start with very dark kind of greens and cool colors, and we're gradually taking it into a much warmer, more contrast, bleached out colors that will take us into the beached sequence, which is what we'll talk about next.
Yeah. In Beached, we tried to get coming right out of the end of storm montage of that bleak lighting. These guys are getting beaten up by the sun. We wanted to almost change the significance of that as you got to Beach. It's just an intensely harsh stage light. Basically, we thought of the beach as a white strip of stage that they would be set off against, that they could stand in, and you could just enjoy the acting that takes place there.
There was a real simplicity to the color scheme at this point because most of these scenes were very character-driven. So the complexity of the jungle and stuff, most of the stuff we kept that away from the characters as far as design.
Yeah, the overall detail ended up being just a blanket in the jungle. It's all kind of very even, so that even though it's busy, your eyes kind of leave it alone. It's almost like a tapestry that sits behind the characters.
Some good color rest areas, actually.
Yeah. The trek was always going to be a big montage sequence, and through visual development, I think everybody lended a hand on this one.
Ideas,
Ideas,
giving ideas.
Yeah.
You know, the canyon, eagle-shaped canyon there, and most of the ideas came up, you know, with that department.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're following different icons on the map, so each of those have to be represented in different formats through the jungle. But there's certain color beats that were played as far as time passage that helped this trek montage work.
Yeah, it was actually a very fun sequence to work on because you didn't have to be as literal to time of day. We could jump around, and the color could be a little bit fun. There's a song going on.
Yeah, because it's supposed to be like a couple of weeks kind of journey, so you can go from night to morning, and then night again, and then afternoon. You're kind of free.
Yeah. And on a lot of these panels, you'll start to see, at least on the production backgrounds, certain flecks of saturated color in the jungle that are certain flowers or something that are kind of a premonition to where we're going with the El Dorado color scheme. So there's some saturation that's starting to build into the jungle motifs that we're starting to see coming up.
So and like a Mayan design that starts influencing how
in the
leaves
are. In the vines.
Repeated patterns of leaf designs and stuff that are very pattern-oriented.
This sequence was keyed by Scott Wills and myself, and I think the key of Sam Mitchlaps is in there, and Richard Daskus, and it was just that was a fun sequence to work on.
So the trek eventually, we take away most of the color as we get to the waterfall sequence, and that's when we get into the introduction of Chel.
Intro to Chel is basically kind of a little relief from all the, kind of the
colorful,
the adventure that's been going on, and it kind of a standstill in time emotionally for the characters. And an easy way to do that was just to take the contrast down, take some of the color out. Although there's still just a nice color against the characters' flesh that just kind of sets them off.
But like you said, in Intro to Chel, if we kept the colorful palette, there would be less contrast with El Dorado later on. Than with doing something a bit more dull, a bit more.
No, that's a great point, because to take it down to this level before we reveal the city was.
Yeah, it's same with sound or picture. It's like I call it the silence before the storm. It's like you need to contrast things together.
Captive audience is basically that transition to the reveal of the city.
And most of those are very cool color schemes, blues, and not that much warmth in most of these,
right.
Saving back once again for the introduction of the city. At the end of this sequence, you start to see the light rays come through, which is the first golden light, and we really made sure that it was basically the color scheme of gold as it's filtering through the vines before the vines open up and reveal the golden city, which is our next sequence.
Tzekel Kan and the Chief. Well, this first image is something I did in development that we're constantly talking about. What is the city gonna really look like when you get there, and actually it kind of stuck off of one of my paintings I did because we didn't approach it as a golden city at first because of story reasons. There were a lot of other things going on, and then we just finally decided, it's El Dorado, it's the city of gold. And this was kind of the first painting, I think, that everybody responded, there you go, it's basically there. And the rest of the keys just take us into the city, basically establishing almost all the locations that we're going to hit thereafter.
This is why the sequence was called the Tzekel Kan Chief, because it used to be an argument between the chief and Tzekel Kan about the arrival of those two new guys. And it ended up being about them, looking at the beauty of the city, and discovering this gold city.
Mm-hmm.
And that's much better.
So lots of contrast and lots of color. Stopping the volcano transitions just a tiny bit out of all that color and contrast. We kept it really warm. There's just tons of warmth to this sequence, and then we take the contrast down a little bit for when the volcano actually erupts, and then it clears. And we basically move into a sunset type feeling by the end.
Actually, the third one that's the one who gave me the idea of having the parting clouds to actually have a ray of light framing Tulio and Miguel in the center of this plaza. And so we did that with special effects department later on. But
yeah, it ends up being a great comedic stop, and its effect and a color idea is very nice. Chel Reveals All. We went through tons of ideas for the lighting of that sequence once we get inside of. We were started out really complicated with trying to depict that we're getting to the celebration. It's gonna have to be night by the end. We should show the light moving down inside and all this stuff, and we ended up just cheating the heck out of it. And once you get inside and close the curtains, it's just them in a darker kind of quiet area, and we did it subtly with sky changes outside the window before celebration.
We did a little cheat, having them lit from the ground when they were pretending they were God and were showing off. And and then as soon as Chel says hello, the light changes to like more like frontal light, to like normal light and normal dream light.
And that was one of the first out of development. There's actually a painting in here that I think Scott Wills did for the interior that kind of nailed how we were going to try to approach all this really intricate design work as far as the backgrounds go.
So we work into celebration. Very bold color statements through this whole sequence.
That was done by Daniel Kakwo.
Yep. And actually that was done pretty early, and for something so pushed, it actually stuck, throughout. We just basically followed it and made it work in production. And you'll see just all the ideas here ended up color-wise. We used them all, and it's much more of almost a Broadway filter on the whole Mayan celebration idea.
And as far as color tracking through the whole film, it balances with creation pretty well, because that was our other saturated color sequence. So as far as pacing, this was a good pacing through the film color-wise.
It's like reminding me that we had this idea of there was like
the splashes
liquid,
turning to people.
Liquid characters dancing around. Dropped the idea because it was kind of long to animate liquid characters.
Ceynote Tribute, and the idea was just to suck all the color out of it, but still keep it colorful because they're in a colorful environment, and it's supposed to feel a little hungover. These guys have been partying all night, so I like the way it ended up working out. I keyed the interior of the litter really dark, and when Tzekel Kan pops in and out, it's this bright, shocking thing to these guys, and it's like kind of alarming. Yeah,
but the idea was having him like a color-wise and sound-wise, like an alarm clock.
Yeah.
After a night of drinking, so there would be like a hangover alarm clock.
The rest of the sequence ended up being a huge transition that we wanted to build towards the sacrifice and then the sacrifice of the gold. So I wanted to keep an interesting sky that would frame the characters with this magenta, and kind of taking the color of the jungle down a little bit, and basically building a little bit towards the golden sky that happens along with the gold. We just wanted a feeling that they were just all this gold is theirs, but it's going down the tubes, and ended up with technically a pretty cool thing of, you'll notice the light moving down the staircase behind them throughout the sequence, that it's all, the gold going away is also timed with the sun coming up at dawn.
Yeah, there's definitely if you look at this entire sequence, you'll see very, very subtle color changes through the entire sequence. And it was to track all of that in a production.
It was a nightmare.
Atmosphere is a little difficult, but it does help to support each of the moments. The Tzekel Kan magic, which needed to be framed properly with maintaining that color scheme, as well as the gold that they see dropped into the Ceynote well.
Cortez Lands. This was basically supposed to be going on at this exact same time that that the Ceynote Tribute sequence was going on. So I wanted it to feel slightly the same, a little grayer, a little more menacing for Cortez landing on the beach. And a pretty simple setup that we just followed through and actually went pretty quickly, I think, through production.
Very dramatic lighting, a lot
Yeah.
of would you say, sort of monochromatic to a certain extent?
Yeah, but then that shocking little bit of golden light that rimmed him just a little bit more than everybody else. It's kind of just a neat little touch because it was a very complicated setup of a boat, a bunch of guards, flags, clouds, the beach, all this stuff, but the balance actually ended up coming together.
Yeah, you can see that he's bringing heavier clowns behind him.
So Nautical Needs, Kevin Turcotte keyed this first key, and I thought it was a great idea to surround them with this golden curtain while they're, just doing their thing and scheming and plotting and happy. And
It was a great idea to have golden curtains because you don't have the gold with them. We didn't put too much gold with them.
Right.
It was very tricky to do,
Yeah.
especially on the moving litter like that. And but they're talking about the gold and how rich they got so quickly.
yeah,
And to have those golden curtains, that was a great idea.
and a great jump to the blue interior with the chief, the somber kind of,
More
just
calm.
a little darker.
Yeah.
Even though it's in
Cooler,
the
yeah.
El Dorado colorful palette, it just had asking the Godfather for for something. It turned out to be a really great dialogue in that sequence, and the setup of his room was very cool.
Very tranquil.
Yeah. Lying Low. This sequence I set up with two keys. I was lazy. No, I wanted to keep it pretty simple because they're going to be moving around this room a lot. Basically had a very brightly lit, sunlit side coming in through the windows, and then the other side of the room being basically backlit a little bit by the sky color. And that's where their gold pile could shine a little bit against that. Ended up working. I love the sky color here against their flesh. I thought was pretty successful. It looked really good. Lying Low Part 2, we cheated all the color down darker in the backgrounds and set it up for his magic to shine. Kind of this dark red background with these glowing lime green and cyan blue effects that I think turned out to be. There's a shot in there that's I think pretty stunning with the character getting hit with blue light against a red background. That's pretty cool.
A lot of cool against warm and very theatrical lighting.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at this sequence, you'll notice too that the character blocking gradually takes them outdoors. So we go from very theatrical darkening of the set to them walking towards that doorway and out through the doorway, and it's a gradual lighting up as Tzekel Kan moves out towards them and kind of they back up towards the stairs. So it's a pretty extreme lighting change just as far as contrast as well as color.
Miguel Alone was always intended to show off the beauty of the city and how Miguel would maybe start falling in love with it and not want to leave. Went through a couple story changes, but we always wanted to show how magical the city was, and really, full color palette on this one. Then turning to a little bit dramatic towards the end with the guards.
Yeah, the character of this sequence is really the city and Miguel. And as we've said before, he's really discovering that the riches of the city are within the people as well. So we start out with a lot of environmental color that we build up as a main character and eventually bring in the color of the characters of the city near the end.
The ball game starts off in the incidental area of the city where Miguel is playing with some of the kids of the city. Tulio catches up with him, and then we do this about face into this arena. And again, it was the idea of a kind of brightly lit stage that they were set off against in this big battle against the warriors.
Also, the lighting change through this. I mean, part of the purpose of the ball game is as the shadow crosses a certain line at the end of the game, we actually, end the game. So there was a whole lighting change through this entire ball game.
Yeah, and a staging of that shadow and how they ended up in that shadow, and Miguel crosses that line when he tells Tzekel Kan off, and and then Tzekel Kan recedes back into the shadow. It was a great staging idea. I think Marcos Mateo did
That's right.
came up with that in lighting, and it was just stunning. Tulio Chel is basically just a quick little sequence with Tulio and Chel arguing over the gold, and I believe Scott Wills did these couple keys for that sequence. Just very close to Lying Low and Chel Reveals All. It's just the interior of their palace.
So basically, the two characters are negotiating over the gold, and at the same time, they're negotiating for their relationship. The color scheme of this kind of goes from the lighter gold and the illumination of that into kind of a romantic sort of color scheme, and then into the contrast with Miguel in the doorway.
Going native was basically a transition out of ball game and showing maybe a couple days going by, and again Miguel falling in love with the city, and Tulio and Chel getting even closer, and it's really just a montage of different images working our way towards Chief and Miguel.
This is really a bridge sequence that is a time change. So the color schemes in this were very kind of a montage, as Ramon was talking about.
Chief and Miguel and the boat has been built by now, and we have this kind of glorious sunset going on while they have this discussion over, what's really important to Miguel. Is he going to stay or go? And the chief hints that he might be on to, what's really up.
Yeah, the atmosphere is a bit like the after dinner cigarette break. You have between two guys and hanging out, by the pier, And
Tzekel Kan Can. We catch up with Tzekel Kan after he's been banished from the ball game, and we take the contrast kind of down into this darker, little gloomier kind of setting where you don't really know what's going to happen, and we're setting up mainly for him spilling a little bit of blood, and he's going to let everybody know what he's going to do.
We're going into, with Tzekel Kan, most of it is a very theatrical sense of lighting. So the color goes alongside that. We have kind of vignette areas of light that have kind of a little bit of color saturation in it, but a little bit more muted to keep in personality with Tzekel Kan.
Yeah, I think the lighting worked out well. I think Paula Sane set up the lighting, and then I just did some color over the top of it, and it had a nice, like you said, theatrical feel to it, spotlighting Tzekel Kan, and he's getting ready to put on a show. Basically, we have a very warm, dark background palette, and then this just vibrant green and cyan magic comes spilling out of the this sacrificial kind of hole in the floor. That was a fun sequence to key with all the effects that were going to be taking place, and served as a roadmap for effects, how they were going to design these effects and how we were going to pull them off.
And most of the lighting in this sequence is very underlit. So from frame one, we have the light coming actually from a hole in the floor, and a lot of that is carried through most of this sequence all the way to the last scene where the Jaguar comes to life.
Yeah, it's funny to see then the part one of this sequence was the light source was coming from the ceiling, like a virtual hole we decided we would have in a roof, and then the second part is from the floor, and then gives more threat and spooky atmosphere by doing that. The first part was more cozy, like you feel like Tzekel Kan is at home, and second part is more like, oh, something wrong's going on.
Jaguar Hunt. We basically injected this a lot more firelight that comes in and lights the Jaguar as he comes through and starts, mauling the city.
And the lighting is very contrasty. We really cheat the lighting according to the scene. Most of the time, the Jaguar has warm lit from some of the braziers in the beginning of the sequence, but also cool moonlight. So you have warm against cool. And depending on where we're at with the sequence, the color goes into cooler color schemes.
Yeah, it helped move you out of the city into this confrontation, basically cool blue moonlit palette, and then all of a sudden the breaking through to the lava area. It was a nice shock of red against all that blue.
What was interesting in the Jaguar Hunt too is you go from, like you said, like warm against cold, and then you go to the lava area, and it gets that's the most aggressive, like the climax of that sequence, and using the big red and yellow, that gives more aggressivity to that moment. It was no more purple or green, it was just red and yellow, and
it ended up being the sequence with probably the most keys because it had so much area to cover and a nice build to it too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that really helped to build the color through the sequence to actually end with the lava sequence. But even as the Jaguar is running through the city and running into buildings, and there's dust and stuff that's being generated by the collapse of the buildings, we have a light source from the Jaguar's eyes that actually light up the dust and actually warm up the color of the dust that the characters are sliding through, which is a different light source that we utilize through the sequence once in a while.
Yeah, originally I keyed almost like car headlights coming out of the Jaguar, and it just felt a little too modern, but I ended up kind of working it into that dust color, which gave a nice effect of, not just the eyes are glowing, but things are being lit up by it. Not necessarily with beams, but when Chel gets thrown to the floor, she's just in this eerie blue light.
And also it creates a certain atmosphere through this sequence. So one thing we wanted to make sure of is that it doesn't, not everything is crystal clear and crisp, and there's a lot of minutia in the air throughout a lot of these shots. And you can see that as the sequence progresses, there's more and more minutia of dust or steam from the lava in the air. And that's got its own color scheme that works and unifies the entire frame.
Heroes Parade is basically the post-Jaguar Hunt area where they've defeated Tzekel Kan and the Jaguar, and try to do I believe Paul Hussein keyed this area originally with just a slightly softer palette to it. Still night, maybe getting closer to dawn, and it just had a little bit more of a romantic feel, not so heavy.
It's still dark, and a lot of the characters are basically played a little bit darker, a bit more muted. The color saturation is down because emotionally at this point, even though there's celebration that they've actually gotten rid of Tzekel Kan and the Jaguar, there's a little bit of melancholy still in the story because there's a rift between Miguel and Tulio. So color-wise, we didn't bring up the color saturation that much because of the emotional content of the characters at this point.
Tzekel Kan Emerges tried to keep it close to Heroes Parade, but then I think it was Bebo had that idea of this kind of cemetery monster movie lighting behind Cortez, which was a great kind of shock to Tzekel Kan and this vision of the gods that he was expecting to come, and that was a fun area to key.
Yeah, most of the time Cortez is played as a dark character over a light background. That's kind of his lighting and color scheme through the film, and we really pushed the limit on this sequence. This is probably the most contrast he's been given.
He travels with the Klieg light behind his back.
Exactly, yeah, really. And really, if you look at it, it's very monochromatic, and a lot of the color is pulled out of it. So, with Cortez, we were very careful about how much color saturation we could put into his sequences.
All right, Departure is kind of picking up on that melancholy mood that we've left Heroes Parade with, and then trying also to get a sense that this is a beautiful city. It's a fantastic area that they're preparing to leave, or at least Tulio's preparing to leave, and this also trying to show the difference between Tulio and Miguel. Miguel is aligned a little bit more with gold and the golden color and that mirror that he stands close to, while when we see Tulio, it's a little more somber. When we were trying to compose the lighting, Marcos had this great idea for the plaza down below, that we come down the steps in kind of a low contrast lighting, and then we come out into sunlight because it is a happy moment with the chief, and we are in bright lighting, and it's a bittersweet but happy, leaving the city. Tulio's got his gold, and they've kind of made amends, and he's ready to go.
Yeah, there is a definite color shift from up in the temple to where Tulio actually is greeted by the chief at the bottom of the stairs. As soon as he comes out of that shadow area, there's a musical changeover, and there's also a color changeover. And the color saturation comes up a little bit and builds up a little bit as we still have a melancholy feel, but there's a little bit more happiness as Tulio is greeted by a lot of the kids and Altivo eventually.
Crashing the gate was pretty easy. It was just leaving that warm light and getting into this insane ride. They have to maneuver through the
cave,
the dark cave.
Yeah.
If you look at the color scheme for Crashing the Gate, it starts out with the golden light of the city, and that's really the light source in the first few shots. As the boat goes through the gate and into the caverns that lead out of the city, we leave that golden light behind. We still contain some of that color in the boat because it's filled with gold, but and sometimes those scenes are illuminated by that gold. But there's a lot of the cooler colors that we're introducing as the boat goes through the canals and
the water became a light source, carrying
the
light
white,
along
the white
with
water, yes.
And eventually, if you watch the sequence, the light source becomes a cool light source from the waterfall that they exit at the end of the ride. So there's this cool blue light of the waterfall that eventually hits the boat and their faces as they approach closer to the columns that they have to collapse at the end of the sequence.
Satisfaction is basically returning to that exterior waterfall setting, along with a little more mist, because there had to be a reveal of the rocks that Tzekel Kan would see, realizing that the entrance to the city was blocked. It was pretty straightforward, working off of the earlier sequence, and keeping Cortez, again, mysterious as a silhouette in the mist was the basic idea behind it.
Once we'd established that it was the same location, then we bring in a little bit more contrast with dark characters over light mist with the Cortez introduction.
And then the contrast to the next sequence, Epilogue, where the guys are behind a rock and they've gotten back their color, and we get interest back in them. So it's a nice contrast between Miguel and Tulio and Cortez.
Also, as Chel gets up on the horse, you'll see that she's actually being hit by a warmer light, an off-screen light that's really the sunset that you don't really see until the very last scene. But we start to go from cooler colors into warmer colors as the music builds into the final song. So the first part of that, as soon as she gets up on the horse, you can see that the color changes is she's being hit by warmer color schemes.
And we barely snuck it into the background, and it was a nice kind of shock to turn around and see, okay, well, we're riding off into the sunset, and we didn't, try to telecast it too far in advance.
As a general color note for the entire film, that we tried to push the boundaries of color saturation and tried to go very extreme with that. That palette is very reminiscent of what we saw in the city of El Dorado, and just stylistically, we wanted to push the boundaries of color saturation for the film.
We have such colorful characters, so we had to keep up with the colorful aspect of it.
And it ended up working. I mean, it was a big juggling act, but we had two main characters with two very primary colors, red and blue, and actually balancing that against these colorful palettes was challenging, but I think the end result was really good.
Yeah.
Miguel's red shirt against the terracotta colors in the El Dorado and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was tricky to do.
It was.
Yeah, to have and still unify all the colors together and make sure it's not overdone with too many colors. Yeah.
There you go.
Okay.
That's it.